Lemon64 presents a Played and video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hey there, welcome to another Lemon64 play guide and review. In this week's episode, we're checking out Ghosts and Goblins, originally developed by Capcom and converted to the Commodore 64 by Elite Systems, published by Elite in 1986. You can see as the game loads, we get a very nice loading picture, which introduces us to some of the enemies that we shall face, including the bosses. And unfortunately I don't believe that the final boss is in the actual game, although I could be wrong, as you are about to see. But the loading does take some time, and I'm not sure whether we got some loading music. I don't think so on the Commodore 64. The title screen reminds us of the arcade machine with the high scores, so let's just press that fire button, and this time let's attempt this game with infinite lives and see how far we can get with it. Yes, I am rather familiar with this, and I did have this back in the day. This is played cold after so many years away, but I do remember the odd trick. And for these demons, no matter what they're called, I've no idea, but by keeping those at the very edge of that screen, we can actually destroy those, and we can get through what is a very difficult area. And getting on top of this life raft is also a very difficult area, but not as difficult as the end of level boss, which we are rapidly approaching at the moment. Despite the odd screen glitch and the odd slowdown, the first level of Ghosts and Goblins on the Commodore 64, I'd say is very well drawn, and it's very atmospheric with that terrific music. You can see the trees are defined and the ground has a nice texturing layer on it. It isn't just a plain barrier, which is supposed to be a platform, and so Elite Systems have gone some texturing lengths with this. Unfortunately, the game difficulty is merciless, and unless you have the patience of several saints, unfortunately you will not have enough lives to get through this first level. And yes, there is a trick to this which I did know back in the day, but I can't seem to remember at this point in time. So let's just speed that game up and let's try to attempt that first level boss. Yes, it is actually possible to take the boss on in stages like this, but it is also possible to get killed just as we get that key. And the important thing to remember about the end of level bosses is they will fire fireballs or ice balls, as they are white. And the important thing is if we duck and face in the opposite direction, those fireballs will go straight through us, and so we are invulnerable to those. But unfortunately for us, we can't remember that particular tip on this playthrough, and it is easier said than done with all these enemies flying around, dropping things on our heads, and of course the end of level boss bouncing on top of our heads at every given opportunity. Unfortunately, there is no way to gain our armour back. We gain one set of armour, and if we lose it, then we walk around naked, or not naked as it is in the Commodore 64 version, and then after that we'll gain one more hit, and then it's game over. Or rather, life over. We gain one life at score checkpoints, but of course we only start with the 4, so you have to make all of these hits count. Level 2 begins nice and easy with a number of columns which we can climb, and we face the usual fairies and of course plants which will gobble us up at every opportunity, and we can't explore these levels otherwise we'll die, and the jumping on offer is slightly on the ropey side because you have to take a step back if you want to jump with an arc, otherwise you'll crash into those platforms and die. Having found our way off that platform, we find some green monkeys which emerge out of these windows, and they have capes and they can fly down. I've no idea where they come from, and they aren't even reminiscent of the arcade version, but you can see in pretty tight spots this game is pretty merciless, and it gives the player little chance to get out of the way with all this stuff going on, because you can see with everything happening all at once, you can see the difficulty level is quite bad. Back in the day I could get to this point without losing a single life, but of course with infinite lives it's easier to make mistakes because we are more careless, we're taking risks. But you can see that these graphics are basically blue and white on this level, and so care hasn't been taken to colour those in, unlike the first level. The art of this mansion is to hammer away with that fire button as quickly as possible and hope that you can get enough shots on target before that thing collides with us and robs some energy. And it's possible to do that with praying and spraying that guy as quickly as possible, but of course if he is too close when we walk down to the bottom of that ladder, we will be unable to get enough shots onto that target and we will die in the process. And you can see screen glitching going on and glitching in the music as well, and maybe this was a rushed release, but at least the levels in this game have loaded on just the one load. Here we are now onto the moving platforms, which should be a dawdle, but of course it isn't because this is Ghosts and Goblins on the Commodore 64. Again, on that second level boss we can turn the opposite way and duck to avoid the fireballs and make us immune to those, but you saw that I left the armour top up till the very last moment and then collected that, hammered the boss, and that's one way to get through it. Here we are on level 3, and these are supposed to be platforms of eyeballs according to the arcade, and sometimes it's easy to forget to take a run up and jump, and if you forget to do that at the critical moments, sometimes you can die, and it's pot luck in this game whether you find the right direction and having played it enough time to remember when to jump straight up and when to try a long jump. To tide us over through those mistakes, we gain some funky music, and sometimes it's great to let the level run just a little bit so we can hear that funky music, which seems to get better as we get deeper into the levels. And oh no, we've found another demon, and yet again let's remember the edge of the screen trick to try and get through that. And yes, it's possible to get onto this level without losing a single life, but I think I started to lose lives on this point once we got to this point back in the day. But you can see it's pretty easy to get rid of those things, and it's a pretty nice scream that they've let out as well, which is I think a sample, and they have used a few samples in this game, including the woo in the soundtrack. With the Lethal Bridge of Doom, the graphics have taken an up step from the bland level 2 graphics, and now we have grey and white instead of blue and white with a little red as well. And it is possible to creep our way through these levels if we take our time, and it's great that the time limit involved is huge, and we will generally not run out of time on these levels. But it is deflating once we get hit just the once. We feel like one more hit will kill us, and so there is no point continuing with the level. But that's why we have the infinite lives. This is the infinite lives challenge, and again I'm not bothering to take my time. Let's just get through this, and let's just speed our way through and see if we can't get to that next level. The loading picture, we will find that end of level boss again, and for some reason he was pretty easy that time. And so let's get on to the 4th level of this game, and this is actually the final level I think on this entire game, because they can only fit 4 levels into 64 kilobytes of memory. You can see the tile set and the colour palette is reverted back to blue and white, but apart from that you can see that we have got a few more colours on the screen thanks to the zombies, and this first part is pretty reminiscent of the first part of the game. And then it descends into hell with a few more of these banshees, and those screamers really do, unfortunately, sap the energy and the willpower if they get any target shots. So luckily this thing isn't actually firing anything, and all its shots are firing backwards up the screen, and so that's yet another bug in this game. It has its fair share of bugs, but like most games that have bugs, including this jumping bug, there are ways through it, and you have to have respect for this even though it has those bugs for what it tried to do. But this could have been a multi-load game, and I think multi-load would have spoilt it quite a bit. but if they had have made this game into a multi-load, then they could have crammed in a lot more to the gaming experience. See, I can't even remember the level, and now we are into unknown territory, and I can't remember whether to go below or above this spot. Maybe if I went above this spot it might lead to the end of the other levels, but I think if I go below this spot it will lead to the end of game boss. But let's just check out the above way anyway. It looks pretty hard, and I think this above passage is actually harder than going the below way. So let's just try to tackle this, and well, I don't think we're going to get through it on this particular playthrough. Luckily for us, this game contains checkpoints, so let's just speed up that footage and try to get to that next checkpoint while I tell you a little bit about this particular game. And you may be surprised that there are only 4 levels in this game as opposed to the 6 levels in the arcade original, developed by Capcom of course. The graphics and the code was both created by Chris Butler, who we saw with the 720 Degrees game, as well as Space Harrier, Ninja Spirit, and he also coded the original Commando conversion for Elite for the Commodore 64. And I think Chris Butler has done a good job, although, as I said, there are a few glitches and a few bugs on offer, but they have crammed at least 4 levels into the single load. I've made it to another checkpoint, and so there's time to mention the music was created by Mark Cooksley, who also created the music for Bomb Jack, Paperboy and Space Harrier for Elite, and also Ikari Warriors, which we've reviewed already. And this game, similar to Ikari Warriors, is very difficult, but I did complete this back in the day by watching a friend complete it, and it was surprising to me that he got all the way through to level 3 without losing a single life. And apart from right at the end where he died, he completed the game, and I was so amazed that I went straight home at the age of about 12 years old, and I went home and completed it straight away. As a copycat manoeuvre, monkey see, monkey do, as he once said. That's how you do it, and I saw it and I copied him and I completed this game. At the time I could complete it, but that was maybe 25 years ago, and now I'm rusty, and now I can't even remember this level, and I'm finding the whole thing pretty frustrating, as you can imagine. So this game doesn't get a high rating on most people's performance charts, but unbelievably this game actually got a very high rating by all the magazines when it was released, because Ace gave it 80%, Your Commodore gave it 80%, CMVG gave it 80%, the current Lemon score is 80%, Commodore Force gave this game 94%, and the Games Machine gave it 95%, with Zap64 giving it an amazing 97%. And even in the re-release category they gave this in the 90s, and this game in general is then worth 8.5 out of 10. On the Commodore 64, we've managed to find the end of game boss, but having found the game boss, unfortunately it's not that easy to get through to that end of game boss, and of course if we collide with this thing here it will throw us into the endless pit, and we have no armor left at this point, so one hit is of course disaster. So no idea how we survived, but we were facing the opposite way to that dragon, and maybe facing the opposite way to that dragon is yet again the maneuver to get through it. glad to know that we are actually approaching the end of this particular play guide for Ghosts and Goblins, and for the rest of the show we will take in a look at the arcade version, which was released on the Commodore 64, and this is the end of game boss, and of course just memorising that pattern is all we need to do, and it's pretty difficult, so let's just fast forward until we get to the point where we get through to it. I think many players would agree that Ghosts and Goblins is very difficult and infuriatingly so, and unless you can play this game to perfection, you will find it absolutely infuriating, and of course I did when I tried to complete this even with infinite lives. But here we go, this is the game ended and we are about to see the mega end of game animation. I'm not sure whether, just like the arcade version, you have to loop the game twice in order to see the later levels, but I can't be bothered to play this game any longer, so let's just skip to the remake, the Ghosts and Goblins Arcade Edition, which was released into the public domain by Nostalgia in 2015. Ghosts and Goblins Arcade begins with a similar loading picture, and you can see they have changed the colours slightly on the demons, and they've also added a zombie in the bottom right corner and a fairy in the bottom left corner, and also one of those red demon things in the top right, and those are great additions to that loading picture. But this is the nostalgia version, and so we don't really need to wait around for it to load. All we need to do is to press start, and just like a disc version, it will whiz on through, hopefully, to that title screen. But just like most cracks, we are interrupted in our nostalgia by the trainers option, and it would be nice to skip this somehow before we even see that, because it is rather annoying when you just want to play the game. And yes, you can play the original game instead, but for this, let's just select the infinite lives and then move on to start game, and let's check out the game experience itself. Quite sure if this music is the same, but let's just press fire and let's start the game up. In this game we get arcade reminiscent music and also better quality effects. You can see we've picked up what looks like a torch weapon, and the torch is the weediest weapon in the entire game and the most useless, so if you pick that up on level 1 you'll be disappointed. And yes, the daggers are in here as well as the lance that we had at the beginning of the game, and I think most of the other weapons are in there as well. It's just that those are very scattered about, and I have picked up the daggers and found the daggers are a great weapon, but the torch in this case is absolutely useless, and I don't think that we're going to survive very long with this. So this just makes the game level experience infinitely harder lobbing around a torch. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find zombies which have, well, buckets available, and by blowing up those buckets or whatever they may be, then I can grab another weapon, hopefully. And those things look like acorns, or at least they did when I was a bit younger, and now they even still look like honeypots or anything but a cart which is supposed to be holding a weapon. And you can see I'm having a pretty rough time trying to march on towards that checkpoint, even if there are checkpoints. And you can see that we also gain a map as well, which is very reminiscent of the arcade, and of course also the Amiga version. Like the original, we do get unclothed and completely naked when we get blown up for the first time, and that isn't particularly hard to change that over, but it's a great effect anyway, and I can't see that that is a thing that they missed on the original game, and I think this is very close to the arcade version. You can see everything is in there. They've improved the landscape even better, with even better texturing, and well, unfortunately we're still picking up bonuses. We're not finding any more extra weaponry which we can use, but marching bravely on naked again, we find instant death, and yet again we find ourselves in the graveyard. How appropriate for such a difficult game. Finally, we have the lance back, and that can be another drawback of this game on both versions, that sometimes you can have the wrong weapon, it's a wrong job, and I'm not quite sure whether the axes are much good on this level, but certainly on level 2, throwing the axes into those guys in that hotel of demons is a great way to get rid of them. But taking another look at this Banshee, unfortunately we don't quite get there. And yes, we have at least made that checkpoint, even though it's fairly difficult to survive. And little things like the hills in the background also help the atmosphere. And this game is pretty simple, so it would be a pretty easy conversion, it would look like. And you can see that they have done a great job of it, even though the original Ghosts and Goblins arcade machine was pretty unforgiving in itself. But you can also see that we have not got the entire level, and after a tiny bit of perhaps loading, I'm not quite sure, we flick screen onto the next section. I'm not quite sure why it does that, but we find identical bosses to the original 64 version, which are slightly different in the arcade, and you can see that the hills and the woodland in the background is preserved from the arcade original. And I think that this is perhaps as good as this game would ever look and ever get on a Commodore 64. And I think that this is available on cartridge as well, so you can flash a cart with this, and you can play this and instantly load it on any 64 or emulator. But I'm not quite sure what I'm using for this. I think this is the disc image which I got on the CSDB. I'm not sure whether turning your back on the enemy's missiles actually works on this arcade version, and I think I turned my back then and it didn't do anything, although I did get jumped on at the same time. But let's try that boss again, and you'll find that some of these elements are easier in this version than on the original Elite version, and some are harder. And so if you can pile all your weaponry into that boss, of course, it's pretty easy. arcade music on level 2 is probably even better than the arcade original, and I've always found that a very catchy tune, although again you have to take a run off those platforms to make it to the next one, and if you forget sometimes you can just fall straight to your doom. And the annoyances of this game really do pile up, and yes, you can have a very frustrating time with this due to several random factors, and you can't even explore because of course pixel perfect jumping is required to do that, and you can't do that really in this game. The controls are better than the original 64 version, and although I don't think they are quite as tight as the original arcade, but you can see this level hasn't changed much from the 64, although we do get that great soundtrack. So sometimes when I say some bits are easier and some bits are harder, I am actually talking about the level design in this version because this is closer to the original arcade, and I'm not too familiar with the original arcade to know which is the best way to go. But I think of course jumping along the top is the best way to go, although I can't seem to make that jump. So that's why I'm having to jump around and try to do it the long way, which doesn't seem to be working, as you can see. But this game is good, and if you like the original game, then this is superior. It's just that, well, it can be just as frustrating in all the wrong areas. But now that we've managed to jump over that gap, let's try to reach that platform which moves and jump off, and that's all we have to do to get further in this level. One good thing about the multi-stage element is that we get a palette change in between the sections, and now we get the brown instead of the blue and the white, which is a lot closer to the original arcade, and of course the walls in this section are more spread out. And if you know which ladders to climb, well, we can even avoid some of these monsters altogether, but I'm choosing to tackle all of those on this particular playthrough. This music was created by Glenn Roon, and most of the code was created by Thomas Kack, and I think this is a noble conversion. I'd give this a 10 out of 10 as far as conversion, but as far as the actual game Ghosts and Goblins, I'd say the playability after all these years is probably worth maybe a 2 or 3 out of 10 as the game concept, and I had more fun playing different games, as you will see a bit later on, including the original Mario port onto the Commodore 64. And Mario is a great game and actually a very addictive game, and this game is very frustrating, as you can tell, and of course just like the arcade original, sometimes you have to be pixel perfect or very lucky, or a mixture of both. I'd say definitely if you are a big fan of Ghosts and Goblins, then certainly check out this nostalgic version called Ghosts and Goblins Arcade. And you'll find that it contains all 6 original arcade levels and all 6 original arcade maps as well, and it contains the arcade level of difficulty. So it can be quite frustrating, and as you can see, even with infinite lives, my patience is running pretty thin. So with no checkpoints until you get to the end of each stage and taking it really cautiously is sometimes the best way to get through it. But here we are, finally on to the end of level 2 boss out of the 6. And let's hope that we remember not to collect that armour. Thank you for viewing another Lemon64 review of the original Ghosts and Goblins and also Ghosts and Goblins Arcade by Nostalgia. And I hope to see you again in another play guide sometime soon.